thank you. And I'm in a slightly awkward position today in that I've got to be polite, nice and friendly, which is, if you know me, is somewhat unusual. And also, because I'm asking the questions rather than answering them, I actually have to be organised. So I've got, for one of the first times in my life, I've got some paper that I have to read from. So I've been involved with the GDSA for the last few years, the Government Digital Sustainability Alliance, and I think it's been a pretty interesting thing to pull together. But what I wanted was because government IT is huge and sprawling, there's no doubt about that. So what I wanted was Tom also has been instrumental in putting all this together. Get him to give a very quick overview of kind of what it is, where it fits, and what it actually means. Because I think it has a huge place of influence for not just the public sector, but a really good demonstration of how the private sector can be working with wider supply chains.
Sure, yes. So hi everyone, I'm Tom Parry from DEFRA, as Mark says. I'm sure that is the Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. I doubt it myself then, but that is where I work. And just to kind of set a bit of a quick context, so that as a kind of department overall, we have policy responsibility for improving and protecting UK's environment, things like water supply, biosecurity and things like that. So that's kind of what our interest is as a department. And this topic's a bit unusual across UK government because generally cross-government UK government IT estate issues are owned by GDS, where Emma works, and Emma talk about them. But for this particular topic, 2022, around the kind of COP session there and stuff, UK government realised that it was such a kind of big opportunity around it that it gave DEFRA responsibility for leading on that kind of cross-government on behalf of GDS too. So it's a bit of a kind of nuanced and different issue. But I think that does show that government recognises that it's one we need to treat seriously and kind of give some of its own attention to. DEFRA in particular has an interest because on both sides of the coin sort of recognise that there is the big challenge that technology generally faces, and people here I'm sure will have their own stats that they like to use to illustrate that point. I put up a couple there about some emissions and water use, and people talked about data and obviously AI being a challenge, but given our interest in some of those policy issues, we also want to, I think, increasingly talk about how we exploit some of the opportunity that innovation and stuff can present to. I've cited the McKinsey report there, but there are others that people I know will really want to look at. LSE have done something recently that showcased some examples. In DEFRA, we've got things like testing using AI for camp penguins, things like peat restoration, intelligent use of pesticides without causing necessary damage to wider ecosystems. So there are chances, I think, for us to recognise that side of the coin as well. But moving on particularly to UK government, one of our duties in that cross-government role is to report every year on government's overall performance. And this room, you're the first people to see these figures in pink. So treat that privilege with everything that it deserves. This will be published very soon. It's our annual report. And you can see there are caveats I know about the accuracy of reporting, particularly on emissions. I don't want to set Mark off on that issue, but I know it is a challenge for us. But that, all that being said, we're making progress on it, and with the support of others, including GDSA, we are getting better on it. But yeah, so the overall big challenge, big opportunities to address, particularly on e-waste. That's been discussed a little bit about in the previous session, circularity. The table there shows you kind of, at the moment, how many devices reach their end of life in the UK government, what happens to them. We're getting good granularity, you can see there about that by device type, where it goes, generating about £2 million a year of resale. And I think that argument about kind of efficiency, cost saving, some of the financial drivers is something that we'll be making as we kind of go to ministers and others with the strategy we'll talk about a bit later. Last slide for me, just open things up a little bit, is to talk about where that stuff comes from, and what we're trying to get better at is having a data-driven approach to some of our work. So see there, when it comes to emissions, for us at the moment, the biggest source is still embodied carbon in our devices, accessories and peripherals, things like that. But the latest annual report will show that hosting and AI and other sources to do data centres are increasing, and that's, I think, we're going to be the direction of travel. But at the moment, it's still, it was referred to earlier as low-hanging fruit, I think, by Rick. I think that is still something that we recognise is a big challenge for us. The table on the right shows you if we can address that embodied carbon issue across our hardware estate. The size of that is enormous. I mean, the number of laptops and desktops across government you can see there is a huge. You compare the number of civil servants, about 1 million. That's a huge number. So, the challenge we faced a couple of years ago was what we do with all that. How do we take advantage of that properly? And I think the key thing we realised was that in 2022. We don't have the expertise that we didn't have then, don't have now, within government to really address that properly. The experts on the topic are the people that work in our supply chain, in academia, and in the kind of wider sector, people that are in this room, not me, but other people here that are technical experts. So we wanted to really tap into that in a way that was a bit more methodical and collaborative. What we didn't want was to kind of get suppliers pitching against each other and having a kind of endless stream of sales calls where really we weren't making progress. So we've worked really hard to make sure that the GDSA itself is a group where people leave their badges at the door, and really it's a collaborative environment where we come together to try and help government address those challenges in a way that is a bit more strategic and informed than we were able to do before. And perhaps we'll get into the details of some of that shortly, but that's kind of overall what it is. The last 2 or 3 years it's grown hugely. We've now got actually over 100 organisations in it too, across supply chain, academia, and get some really good outputs.
I think one of the key things that seems to, having been involved right at the heart of the GDSA for so long, I've seen the learning exercise. Because in the early days, there was a real danger that getting a whole bunch of suppliers in the room would involve everyone trying to compete with each other to prove they were special and best and try and see it as a commercial leverage opportunity. Luckily, that didn't happen. But the biggest risk, and this is where I think kind of the private sector can learn a lot from this, is how do you avoid it becoming a talking shop? Because a lot of time you get a lot of wise nodding heads in the room of people who know the subject and they all agree they're very wise. And they leave thinking they're very wise, but actually nothing changes in the slightest. And that's one of the learnings we've had, is how do we actually, within all the working groups that exist, firstly, how do we get competitors to agree to share things that they might not necessarily want to share? That's not easy. But only over time do you get that when the relationships build, when people realise they can trust each other. But it's then how do you turn it into something that can actually add value and help? And that's where I'd say from kind of your perspective, I mean, so you see it from a very different view, because you're involved in the horrible world of AI.
Yeah.
And not that I'm not, actually, I'm sure you can know that. And you see it from working with these teams. So what's your view on having engaged with the GDSA? And because without any idea, if I'm being very honest.
Ooh. Okay. I was thinking of introducing myself properly first.
Say hello.
Hi. So I'm Emma Albury, Digital Sustainability Lead in One Login, Government Digital Services in the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. It's a long one. I'm also Chair of the Cross-Government AI Sustainability Group and the Government Representative in the GDSA Disruptive Technologies Group. And that Disruptive Technologies Group, so that's looking not just at AI, but also quantum computing, biotechnology, carbon sequestration technology, what else are we doing? Digital twins, can't think what else now, a whole gamut of things, right? And it came about because DEFRA has created this government digital sustainability strategy, and within it there's a chapter on disruptive technology with a target. By 2030, government will have implemented principles for the sustainable implementation and use of innovative technologies. And then within it, it talks about how we're to gang up with DEFRA and the cross-government digital sustainability steering group to implement what's in that strategy. So we're in a nascent stage at the moment. Honestly, we've had one meeting and I wasn't there for it because I was in the outback. Down under. But from what I've come and I got filled in on it, we're having another meeting this week. But the first meeting we did establish the sort of 3 key missions. And that was, one, to create these principles for the sustainable implementation and use of innovative technologies. The second mission is to produce and publish a horizon scan of emerging tech to see what's out there, anything that's got sustainability considerations in it. And then the third mission is identifying opportunities for pilots within government of innovative technologies that will bring about sustainability benefits. Because there's so much exciting stuff being done out there, and we as government really want to support those initiatives. So 3 missions. What was your question?
I think you got that. So I think so one of the key things actually is particularly in that world of AI is when we talk about governance, what do you think is holding back sustainable governance of AI? Lack of accountability, for sure. I think,
massive lack of accountability. I do also think that there is different priorities for different stakeholders, and so actually getting everyone on the same page and consistency in what we're aiming for is very challenging. And I say that because I'm a civil servant, and I take that title very seriously. I'm serving civilians. I'm not here serving big tech. I'm looking after the people, right? However, I do think that there is, with AI in particular, we're also wrapped up in this concept of growth. And I don't feel we're really thinking about what that growth is or what that means. I think most of the time it's pointed at sort of value from an economic perspective. But then that's at the sacrifice of the civilians that I'm representing. If we're looking at I read very doomful reports, of what we're facing in this country and globally around the impacts of if we're not reducing the environmental impacts of some of the technologies that we're using. And it's really grim. It's really grim. And so that's what I'm focusing on. So I'm constantly thinking what do the citizens need and what technologies should we be using and how should we be using them. And honestly, that's at odds a lot of the time with just this messaging that is industry-wide and being fed, I'm just going to say it, by big tech. And I will say, I think everyone is drinking that Kool-Aid, including the government, which is controversial for me to say. But I think it's kind of like, why do we need this infinite growth in economy of essentially making big tech more profitable at the sacrifice of our civilians? And on top of that, it's extraordinarily short-sighted, because if you do any kind of risk assessments, and once again I'll refer to these reports I'm looking at, wow, we've got some very expensive crises ahead of us. Very expensive. So, it's short-term economic earnings for long-time massive expenditure at the sacrifice of the everyday person that I'm representing. And I would say no one's taking accountability for that. No one. And, there isn't enough governance in place around that, because instead the focus is too much on opportunities for economic growth instead.
Thank you. So I'm zooming out, because it's absolutely a problem. There's no doubt at all. And the problem starts for me with the vendors not necessarily coming to the table with the information that's required to enable those better decisions. But if we look at government as a whole, Tom, so one of the largest buyers of technology in the UK by some margin, where do you think, take the GDSA but also take the wider supply chain, where do you think you've got leverage over them, and what do you think you could do?
Yeah, so I think there's I think government overall is a massive buyer of technology we talked about. But I think there are a few things in particular that are coming up that are worth pointing out. So there's a move across government to buy things once, have a single device spec, go out to market once for hardware, software, stuff like that. It's important for us to influence that work. GDSA can help us do that in a way that's effective. I think too what we found is that, to be fair to suppliers, including hyperscalers and things like that, where we've gone to them with a single clear ask from government overall on this stuff, we've had a lot more joy. So I'll give the example of AWS, because they've really been engaged on that topic over the past year, and they've come to us and we've gone back to them with a coordinated ask, and that's helped us actually get a lot of progress on stuff that we struggled to today. So I think the onus on us to go with a clear and joined up ask on behalf of government overall, not try and man-mark department by department to them. It's something that's important. But then also, Emma's talked about the group that she's running now, and I think being clear about where we want their expertise and where we need it, and actually where we don't have it ourselves, is important too. We've got some stuff that's happening at the moment. There's loads of work that is already underway, including things like on procurement. So DEFRA have just bought a big new end user device for procurement. The colleagues from here from Atos and Circular Compute can talk about, because they're involved in it. But that's been a model for government now, so we can show how that works. We can reassure other departments about the security requirements we put in place, about the financial savings it's driven, about the end user satisfaction that it's driving. So I think what we can do more of is kind of share where we know a department is pushing the boundary a little bit to make sure that others know about it, and that can help some nervousness that might exist, in their own set of organisations.
So what do you think, so what information do you think suppliers should be providing as standard?
So I think that what we need, I'm not going to answer that question. Just to be obvious, right? Because I think it's too nuanced and too complex. I'm not an expert in that particular point. I don't want to say something here that's going to get me set hairs running. But I think where we are getting to with all suppliers is greater transparency and a greater willingness to say where we don't have the information, what we're going to do to get it right. We've got some priorities that we kind of set out in terms of new strategy I mentioned, and I think the outcomes that you can see there are what the language we're capturing all this in. We talked about resilience earlier, something we want to talk more about. I think that's going to get us a lot of leverage with ministerial sign-off and others. And the final point there is one too, that I think is an opportunity for us. So Mark, you're an example of this. There are lots of UK-based SME companies who are growing and providing innovation and expertise on this topic. And ministers love to hear that sort of stuff. The more we can evidence that and say that the way that they can support British industry is by prioritising this work and showing their commitment to it, I think that will be important to us. To get to your question, I think the priorities that we've got there, which are the ones that the new strategy will articulate, broadly speaking, they're the things that we want suppliers to be able to report against in a way that is standardised, to pick up the conversation earlier, and transparent. But I think that's the kind of high-level set of topics we want them to be doing so.
Thank you. From your perspective, when it comes to data you can use to try to make decisions, where do you see that fitting in? What would you do if you had what affects you? What would it look like?
Ooh, dream scenario. So yeah, I mean, I work in government digital services, so we are constantly trying to measure, our services, and it's very hard. We just have to proxy everything. So yeah, of course, we want energy, carbon, water. I would really love, and this is taking it even further, but I would like to be looking at sort of the land as well. The sort of data centers are being built on, and sort of look at the habitats and sort of see what impact that's having on the wildlife there. As I was mentioning this morning in a session, I would love to have a whole cradle to grave analysis and reporting, and so we actually know sort of, in the global south there is a lot going on that we don't know about, or we do know about it, but we don't have data on any of it. And with the mining, a lot of water is being used, and then there's a lot of transportation getting the resources to us, and involved in the whole manufacturing process. And so it'd be really great. I mean, we're all culpable, right, in a lot of unethical practices that are happening in the global south, because we are, purchasing products and items that, that's the source of the resources. And so we do, because we're culpable, we need to know what's going on. We need data around that as well. And then, of course, same deal with e-waste. I mean, generally e-waste here in the UK is just shipped off to another country and dealt with. And I think we kind of assume our responsibility in the global north sort of stops with our contracts, and once it's with the suppliers who are taking care of the e-waste, hey, that's their problem. No, it's not. I mean, that's really irresponsible of us. I mean, the climate crisis doesn't respect borders. Why are we adhering to sort of borders around responsibility? Particularly when, in the global north, our consumer choices are having a massive impact on people in the global south, far more than theirs are. So we are responsible. So we do need data around that as well. Whole cradle to the grave.
So that's kind of the data. The big elephant in the room often is the word that gets thrown around, which is accountability. Mm-hmm. So often this gets pushed, everything gets delegated downwards. There's no actual ownership. A huge amount of work in government. When I look at things like the design principles, the greening government strategy, there's a genuine feeling that accountability is starting to shift upwards. and the pain is going to be felt by sort of senior leaders who are going to actually be responsible and accountable for the number that they're holding now. Because often it's a bit of a cheesy phrase. People say it's not someone's job, it's everyone's job. But so if you look at it from a cross-government perspective, because you've got such a different level of maturity going across every single department, from your perspective, how do you see yourself kind of helping to drive that level of accountability and getting the metrics, that kind of thing?
Sure. My boss for this work is the DEFRA's Director of Infrastructure, Ed Parry, no relation. But he is that kind of one individual. He's a senior civil servant. He's part of all those kind of relevant forums across government, and part of his objectives and SCS objectives are measured differently to normal civil servants like me and Emma. That they get it's a clearer relation, I think, to their objectives in terms of pay and remuneration and stuff. So Ed's got a really clear objective around this work. Part of the new strategy, without spoiler alert for people, but part of that will be that departments themselves replicate that model, and they have a kind of relevant STS for their department who owns their own work on this. But I think ultimately, to your point, Mike, if it's not one person's job, it's too easy at that level, particularly to kind of divvy it up and say, well, I couldn't do it because my colleague wasn't doing this either. So that work on individual accountability is something that will be at the heart of it. Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Well, I was going to then turn the question in a very evil way to you, which is, so Tom's given that lovely kind of cross-government view, which is how it should be done, how Navarra intend. How do you think it will work in practice?
Oh. Can I say what I thought?
The answer might be no comment, but...
Can I say I thought I had before, and then we'll revisit this. I think if we're demanding accountability industry-wide, which I think we should, we also need to be responsible around, like, what are we asking? What are we asking? We can't just say, hey, you need to be accountable, you need to give us this data, without actually clarifying what that looks like and what we really need. And I do think GDSA, that's a purpose that we serve. And there was that piece done on Scope 3 reporting by a working group last year, I think it was. And that's fantastic because, Scope 3 reporting was seen as being really quite ambiguous and tricky to figure out. So if we in GDSA say, hey, this is what we mean by Scope 3 reporting, it's what you need to cover, then we can expect people to be accountable. But if we're not setting sort of, those guidelines, it's not really right for us to expect to get what we want if we're not telling them.
And I would say that Scope 3 report that Emma refers to, so that was actually a really interesting exercise to have worked on, because even within the working group, which is a bunch of people who profess to know the subject in a great level of detail, none of us could agree on what we wanted to do, or how we wanted to do it, or what should be measured, or how it should be measured. And it took us 8 to 10 months of some pretty intense arguments at times, where we all stopped talking to each other and having a bit of a sulk. or I stopped talking to you and having a bit of a sulk.
People stopped talking to you.
Yeah, people stopped talking to me. But we eventually came around to the fact that actually it wasn't about the perfection of measuring Scope 3. It was actually about, we all agreed it should be measured, and there were just different views on the level of quality of data and usability of the data, and we were just all coming at it from the lens that we lived our lives in. And that was a massive learning exercise, which actually showed that there is no actual right answer. It's just that not doing it is not an option. And we had to agree, how do we communicate that fact in a way that made sense to people? We were trying to show things like a maturity index, that kind of thing. Because we had to be able to roll the data up to the multitude of different personas in a way that made sense, didn't offend people, didn't confuse people, and gave data that you could actually get without forcing. Because the biggest problem you have with measurement is, if you aim for perfection, everything stops. Nothing changes and all progress stops completely, so you have to be cognizant of that. And that again was an outcome of working together within the whole working group, as we saw that level of maturity from one side of it saying just use proxies or guesstimates or spend-based data, through to the other end of the spectrum saying we must have exact configuration-based LCAs and EPDs with exact measurements of everything before we even have a conversation. So zooming back out to it, and I'll run out of time.
Just a few minutes, I want to leave time for maybe another question from the audience.
So we'll finish off then. If you look forward 12 months, what would have changed?
Well, I think a lot of progress on particular guidance on AI topics to talk about. Just on that Scope 3 stuff, I think Chris Andrews, who's picking up that work, is here today, so I'm sure Chris would have a chat with you about how it's going forward. And I think we've got the strategy published, we'll be able to report against progress on it. And we'll be publishing our next annual report, which will have the information I shared earlier, but probably a bit more granularity to be able to track that really clearly against some of the targets that I've also shared today. But no, I really look forward to going. I just want to say this has been a great event. I didn't know a huge amount about this organisation before, but I think it's one that we definitely want to work more closely with. And Mark, thanks to you, you can't make that link for us, so I think it's been really useful for me to be here. So thank you for doing that.
So then we'll let Emma finish up then.
Oh, no.
12 months for you then, what would it look like?
Oh. Whew. Okay. Well, yeah, I would really love to do those 3 missions, achieve that. I think that would be fantastic to have like principles in place. Maybe just because, you know, there's this massive push constantly for speed. Okay, can I say another controversial thing? All right. So we've got big tech continually saying to us, more, faster. We have to move faster. Why? Who says? They say, and we're all following that. We don't have to go faster. What we need to do is do things better, and sometimes that takes time, you know, and focus and concentration and collaboration. Collaboration takes time. But what we're going to be doing is be creating, like, you know, better services, better products that are better for the environment and the planet. Like, slow down. It's okay. Don't drink the go faster Kool-Aid. It's not necessary. And I feel, once again, government has adopted that mentality. Oh my gosh, we have to have, you know, massive AI rollouts. Everyone. It's just, I, once again, return to myself, my position as a civil servant. And citizens don't want that. The average person doesn't like the speed that technology is moving at. They don't like it, they're overwhelmed by it, and it's actually led to a great big distrust of big tech, right? So and what's the point of the technologies we're using if the citizens they're built for don't want to use them, and in fact are against them? So I think instead, yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room is, well, I hope you're on board with this because you care about sustainability, but shifting our value system, I hope in 12 months' time, there is a shift in value systems, and there is an understanding that there are things that are more important than just pumping out, you know, new tech and new innovation, bam, in a really reckless way, and instead a slowing down and making tech a beautiful thing that will enhance the lives and the well-being of, you know, the citizens I serve.
That's a great
and I hope
point.
you care about it.
We have a minute or two for any questions for Tom or Emma from the audience. Corinne will bring a mic over to you.
Yeah, thanks guys, that was really good. And yeah, it was great from Tech UK, straight away to the tech sector. I'm loving this. The strategy is really exciting. We'll pump it out, we'll do everything we can to make it a reality. It's awesome. But do you need to change the procurement rules to allow for this? Because, you know, obviously you guys do the same, but NHS can go and do its own tender, DWP can do its own tender and procure stuff. How do you make sure this is really embedded into the decision making when it comes to saying, I want this over this, over this?
Yeah, just really quick on that, Nico. So I think there's some pretty, the low hanging fruit for us, I think, is to make it easier for those departments that want to do this, easier for them to do it in practice, because even departments that were on board with the idea of it, until recently, we haven't had template requirements and questions and stuff for them to use, and we've made progress on that through the GDSA, but that's the easy stuff, I think. Second bit is actually, and it's difficult, because for us saying this, we want a minimum weighting on sustainability. There'll be someone saying they want a minimum weighting on cyber, someone saying they want a minimum weighting on accessibility, etc. But ultimately, we need to, if we can't mandate that requirement, and I'm not going to promise we can do that, that's the ambition. Things like government buying standards that I think DEFRA has worked on, GDSA has helped us with, do set minimum requirements for all government procurements. The single procurement I mentioned that the government commercial agency is doing is another example, but I think, Craig, it'll probably be a case of, as those things come up, influencing them as strongly as we can, and probably using Tech UK and GDSA and others to make that argument at the kind of ministerial level where we can't always make it ourselves as civil servants, and that's where it adds value. But yeah, nice to see you, Craig. I didn't spot you there.
Can I add to that? So in the cross-government cross-government AI sustainability group that I chair, That's actually something I'm trying to do at the moment. So team up suppliers with different representatives from the procurement teams across government so there can be consistency and also so they can talk directly with suppliers. And thankfully the GDSA has allowed us to have contact with suppliers, then we can bring them into the cross-gov groups. Any suppliers in the room, hit me up, would love to chat to you, because we do want everyone on the same page, and we do need that consistency across gov. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So we're running a little bit behind, so we are going to move on. Thank you, Tom.
Really clear.